What if the guilt you feel right now, the guilt that is keeping you up at night, making you second guess yourself, making you wonder if you are a terrible person, what if that guilt is not a sign that you are wrong, but the most powerful evidence that you are genuinely, deeply, beautifully good? What if the people who actually deserve to be cut off never lose a single night of sleep over it, and the only person suffering from your decision is you, a person who loved too hard, tried too long, and finally exhaustedly chose survival? What if I told you that the boundary you set, the one everyone is calling selfish, cold, and cruel, is actually the bravest, most loving thing you have ever done for yourself? And what if the guilt you refuse to let go of is the very thing preventing you from accessing the healing that is already waiting for you on the other side? Stay with me, because what we are about to explore together will not just change how you see this decision, it will change how you see yourself. What if the most courageous thing you have ever done in your entire life is the thing that is currently making you feel like the worst person in the world? What if the decision that was absolutely necessary for your survival, the boundary you finally set, the relationship you finally ended, the person you finally had to walk away from, is the exact decision that is now keeping you awake at night, filling your chest with a guilt so heavy it feels almost physical? I want to talk about that guilt today, not to dismiss it, not to tell you it is irrational or that you should simply get over it, but to look at it directly, honestly, and with the kind of courage that real healing requires, because that guilt deserves to be understood, not just endured. Let's start at the very beginning of this. You cut someone off, or you are considering it, or you did it months ago and told yourself you were fine and you are not fine, and the guilt is still there, quiet and persistent, like a low-grade fever that never quite breaks, and the world around you, or at least the loudest voices in it, has an opinion about what you did. You're being too sensitive. That's your family. You don't cut off family. They made mistakes, but everyone makes mistakes. You used to be so close, how could you just throw that away? What kind of person gives up on someone like that? And because you are a person with a conscience, a deeply feeling, empathetic, genuinely loving person, those voices find the exact cracks in your confidence and they pour straight through. And suddenly you are not just grieving the relationship, you are on trial for ending it. Here is the first thing I need you to understand, and I need you to really let this land. The guilt you are feeling is not evidence that you made the wrong decision. It is evidence of who you are. Think about that for a moment. The people in this world who truly deserve to be cut off, the chronic manipulators, the repeated boundary violators, the people who use love as leverage and connection as control, those people, when relationships end, feel one primary emotion: anger, indignation, a sense of injustice, that someone had the audacity to stop accepting their behavior. They do not feel guilt. You feel guilt because you are a person who loves genuinely. You feel guilt because you tried repeatedly, exhaustingly, at enormous personal cost before you finally reached your limit. You feel guilt because the decision cost you something real and you are grieving a real loss. Your guilt is a character reference, not a verdict. But now I need to ask you something uncomfortable, because this is where most conversations about cutting people off stop short of the truth. How long had you been hurting before you finally acted? How many times did you have the conversation that changed nothing? How many boundaries did you set that were immediately disrespected? How many times did you extend grace and have it mistaken for permission to continue? How many nights did you spend making yourself smaller, quieter, less, so that someone else could remain comfortable in their patterns? Because here's what I know about people who eventually cut someone off: they don't do it quickly. They don't do it lightly. They do not wake up one morning in a good mood and decide on a whim to eliminate someone from their lives. Cutting someone off is almost always the last chapter of a very long book, a book filled with attempted conversations, second chances, swallowed pain, and quiet desperation. You did not cut them off too soon. If anything, you waited too long, and you paid the price of that waiting in your own emotional, mental, and sometimes physical health. Now let's talk about this word selfish, because it is the weapon most commonly used against people who set boundaries, and it is extraordinarily effective because it targets the exact place where good people are most vulnerable. The moment you protect yourself, someone calls you selfish. The moment you say, "This is not working for me," someone reminds you of everything they ever did for you. The moment you create distance, someone reframes your survival as abandonment. And I want you to think very carefully about the mechanics of that accusation, because it reveals something important. A person who genuinely loves you, even a person who is hurt by your decision, even a person who disagrees with it, even a person who is grieving the loss of closeness with you, a person who genuinely loves you will ultimately, even through their pain, respect your need for space. They may not like it, they may be sad about it, but they will not weaponize your compassion against you. When someone responds to your boundary with a campaign to make you feel like a monster, they are not demonstrating love. They are demonstrating control. They are revealing that what they valued was not you, it was access to you. And that distinction is everything. The person who calls you selfish for protecting yourself is usually the person whose behavior made protection necessary. Let me say something now about obligation, because obligation is one of the most powerful and most dangerous forces in human relationships. We are taught from our earliest years that certain relationships carry automatic, unconditional obligation. Family, childhood friendships, long-term partnerships. And there is something beautiful in that teaching. Connection deserves to be honored, history deserves to be valued, and commitment is genuinely important. But obligation without conditions is not love. It is a contract written entirely in the other person's favor. You are not obligated to maintain a relationship that is damaging your mental health, regardless of how long it has existed. You are not obligated to keep showing up for someone who has consistently shown you that they will not show up for you. You are not obligated to sacrifice your well-being on the altar of someone else's comfort, but they need me. Yes, and you need you more, but we have so much history. Yes, and history is not a life sentence. But what will people think? Here is the most liberating truth I can offer you. What people think about a decision they have never had to make, in a relationship they have never had to navigate, with a wound they have never had to carry, is genuinely, completely, entirely irrelevant to your healing. You do not owe anyone your trauma as the price of admission for your own boundaries. This is not good for me is a complete sentence. It needs no footnotes, no evidence, no court-approved documentation of every wound you received. You experienced it. You know what it cost you. And you made a decision from that knowledge. That is not cruelty, that is wisdom. Now, I want to talk about something that almost nobody addresses in conversations about cutting people off, because it is uncomfortable and because it complicates the narrative that ending a relationship is always empowering and clean and straightforward. Sometimes cutting someone off is the most loving thing you can do for them. I know that sounds almost offensive. How can removing yourself from someone's life be an act of love toward them? But think about it with me for a moment. Sometimes our continued presence in a destructive dynamic actually enables the other person's most harmful patterns. When we keep accepting behavior that crosses our boundaries, even with resentment, even with pain, we are inadvertently communicating that the behavior is acceptable. We become, without intending to, a participant in the cycle. Sometimes the most honest mirror you can hold up to someone is your absence. Sometimes the loss of the relationship is the only consequence significant enough to reach them. Sometimes your leaving is the event that finally prompts them to examine what their behavior costs, not because you are trying to teach them a lesson, but simply because you are finally, for the first time, putting your own well-being first. And sometimes, and this is the hardest version, cutting someone off is loving because the relationship itself had become a space where neither of you could grow, where you were both performing versions of yourselves that were keeping you both stuck, where the pattern of the relationship had become more powerful than either of the individuals inside it. In those cases, ending it is not a failure of love. It is love reaching its most honest conclusion. Now, and I need you to stay with me here because this is the part nobody warns you about. Let's talk about the grief. Everyone applauds the strength it takes to cut someone off. They celebrate the boundary, the courage, the self-respect. And yes, all of that deserves acknowledgement. But what comes after the decision? What comes after the finality? What comes in the silence where that relationship used to be? Grief. Strange, complicated, guilt-soaked grief. The grief of missing someone who hurt you. And this is perhaps the most disorienting human experience there is, missing someone whose absence is also a relief. Grieving someone you are simultaneously glad is no longer in your daily life. Loving someone and knowing that loving them from a distance is the only version of love that keeps you safe. This grief does not mean you made the wrong choice, it means you made a real one. You are allowed to grieve the good memories alongside the painful ones. You are allowed to miss the version of them that existed before everything went wrong, or the version you always hoped they would become. You are allowed to wish it had ended differently, wish it hadn't needed to end at all, wish the relationship could have been what it should have been. That grief is not weakness. It is not confusion. It is not a signal to go back. It is the natural, human, healthy response to loss. Even a loss that was necessary, even a loss that was chosen, even a loss that ultimately saved you. Sit inside that grief. Don't rush through it to get to the part where you feel strong and certain and at peace. The grief is not an obstacle to healing. The grief is part of healing. It is your heart processing the full, honest reality of what happened, not the sanitized, simplified version where cutting someone off feels clean and triumphant, but the real version where it is messy and sad and complicated and absolutely the right thing nonetheless. And as you sit inside that grief, As you navigate the guilt and the second guessing and the nights when you almost pick up the phone, I want you to return to this. You are not a villain in this story. You are a person who gave until they had nothing left, a person who tried until trying became self-destruction, a person who loved authentically and was not loved safely in return, a person who finally, at great personal cost, chose to honor the one relationship that had been neglected the longest, the relationship with yourself. That is not something to feel guilty about. That is something to feel quietly, tremblingly, and perfectly proud of. The guilt will not disappear overnight. Healing is not a single decision. It is 1,000 small decisions made over time, often without feeling heroic, often without immediate reward. There will be days when the guilt is louder than everything else, days when you wonder if you should have tried harder, waited longer, been more patient. On those days, I want you to remember something. Patience with people who repeatedly harm you is not a virtue. It is a habit dressed in spiritual language. And the moment you stopped extending that habit, the moment you finally courageously said enough, was not the moment you failed the relationship. It was the moment you stopped failing yourself. Everything we have explored together today comes down to this single essential truth. Cutting someone off when it is genuinely necessary for your emotional, mental, or physical survival is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-knowledge. It is you finally, after perhaps a very long time of not doing so, treating yourself with the same care and protection you so readily extended to everyone else. The guilt you feel does not make you a bad person. It makes you a human person, one who loved genuinely, tried earnestly, and made a heartbreaking decision because no easier option remained. Carry that guilt with compassion, not condemnation. Examine it honestly, but do not let it become a life sentence. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to grieve the loss. You are allowed to wish it had been different while knowing you could not have continued as things were. You are allowed to hold all of those contradictions at once because that is not confusion. That is emotional maturity. That is the full, honest, complicated experience of being a deeply feeling human being navigating an imperfect world. The relationship may be over, but your story is not. Your capacity to love is not diminished. It is, if anything, better protected now. Your ability to connect, to trust, to be genuinely present in relationships that are safe and mutual and nourishing, that is still entirely beautifully, powerfully intact. Go forward. Not without the grief, not without the guilt, but through them, with your eyes open and your heart carefully, bravely open too. You made the right choice. And one day, not today perhaps, but one day, you will know that with every part of yourself,